Hello, my name is Tone Skårdal Tobiasson, and I'm going to tell a story about Eva Lie, a Norwegian designer who has been working with the Norwegian folk costumes in a new and innovative way. So let's go to the first slide. This is the book that I wrote about Eva Lie, and this is what I'll be telling you about. And as you see, I'm an author, a journalist, and also a founder of something called Nice Fashion. I started my career working in fashion magazines, and this is the last one that I worked for, Oslo Fashion Week. And this is also where I started delving into sustainability issues when it comes to textiles and fashion, and where we also started Nordic Initiative Clean and Ethical, which is what NICE stands for. I've also been writing some books, some of them by myself, but most of them together with a prominent researcher here in Norway, Professor Ingen Grimstad Klepp, who is at the Consumption Institute, Norwegian Consumption Institute at Oslo Metropolitan University, and that's a mouthful. We've been writing about wool, we've been writing about Norwegian knitting history, we've been writing about Norwegian wool and knitting, but we've also been writing about how to have the most sustainable wardrobe ever. Those are our latest books there. We have also been working with research projects which have sort of resulted in these books. The first one was krus, which means crimp in Norwegian. This was a big project on Norwegian sheep breeds and how to use their wool in the best possible way. Right now, we are working on a project, Amazing Grazing, which is all about the different products one gets from rangeland grazing. And there, of course, wool is also very important. The first book that we wrote together was called Pure Wool, in Norwegian Ren Ull. And as you can see here, we were lucky enough to have Prince Charles write our foreword. This was also when I first met Livia Firth, and we started discussing sustainability issues in relation to fashion and textiles. The book, and this shows my family on our national holiday, May 17th. And as you see, very many of the women here, and some of the men, are wearing the national costume. Now, statistics in Norway say that 75% of all the women and fewer men, maybe 25%, but it's a growing number, have a national costume. Of course, there's a lot of history behind our national costumes, and here we see Princess Maud before she became Queen of Norway, and she's wearing the Hardanger costume. This was becoming, in a way, the national costume back then. And one of the things that Hulda Garborg, who was collecting the different costumes and traditions from around Norway, wanted to ensure was that the local differences became important. So she was one of the people who really lifted up the very local traditions as opposed to a more national costume. And here, of course, wool embroidery on wool materials became very important. Also, this whole understanding of Norwegianness, Norway becoming a country in 1905, no longer being under Sweden or Denmark, was very important. And so here you see Amanda Hurst, who has married a Norwegian, wearing her national costume, and of course then also showing off her Norwegianness in a way. We wear our national costumes on many occasions, so they do get a lot of use. In the middle here, you see me and my daughter. I'm wearing the one national costume from Telemark that I got when I was 15 years old. My daughter inherited my mom's national costume. So it's been sewn in. Mine has been sewn out a couple of times for various reasons. But as you see, it is mainly on occasions when one wants to get dressed up a little, for example, on a national holiday, or christenings, or weddings, or even if you're invited to a gala dinner at the Royal Palace, the Bunad, or national costume, is appropriate dress. It is now also being used as a political statement. So when the Bunads guerrilla are actioning around the country against hospitals being closed down in local small communities, they don their Bunad and they march wearing it, holding placards and being very political around their local connection. My main concern when I'm working with textiles and sustainability is the overproduction and overconsumption that is rampant right now. I call it the modern DDT, design destined for trash. And this is one of the major issues that we are facing in the fashion business. We had just sent to the publishers a English language book called Local, Slow and Sustainable Fashion Fibers, Wool as a Fabric for Change, where we are looking into this issue and we are addressing the overproduction and overconsumption, looking at local and slow alternatives, inspired by the slow food movement, actually. Because in Norway, we are very lucky. We do have a value chain for wool still intact. This is mainly because of two things. One is knitting yarns, and eager Norwegian knitters. 50% of all Norwegian women knit. This is twice as much as Americans, twice as much as British, twice as much as Swedes. So we're very eager knitters. The other reason for us having a value chain intact is, in fact, our bunads, our national costumes. Because, even though many textile factories, of course, started up in the 1800s in Oslo and all over Norway, most of them have been closed down. But because of this value chain for wool, the bunads and the knitting yarns, they are still here. And this is what inspired Eva Lie very much. She was inspired by the very local factories and the women who toiled in these factories to deliver very nice fabrics to the public. So here you see Eva Lie back in the 1980s when she first started playing around with the national costume and bunad. She's on the catwalk here with for a big catwalk show. And slowly but surely, she realized that her work, when it came to fashion, needed to be tied very closely to Norwegian tradition. She was very much concerned about that. We did have an important tradition that we needed to lift forward and upward. So on the other side here, you see her with her daughter, Marta, who she's now running her business with behind the palace in where they have a workshop and a store. When we wrote the book, it was very important for me to put Eva Lie's work in a big picture and show that when it came to this whole idea around folk costumes and the bunad, it had been a very fluid thing originally, something that you created yourself based on the materials that were available in your valley when the rag and bone man maybe came around with or the local seller of sewn goods and different materials. so that people used what became available for them and their own creativity to create wonderful local costumes. Of course, they differed very much from valley to valley, and this is sort of the difference that made it interesting as a fashion statement, but also as something that was tied to tradition. Then around late 1800s, 1900s, this became more and more sort of locked into that a bunad was supposed to be look like something very specific for the different areas, and that you couldn't really make any changes or personal additions. And Eva-Li has in a way opened up this landscape, so that one now can talk about a much more openness around how one can use this type of traditional clothing. She also developed what became the 1,000-year jubilee dress for Oslo. Here you see the women's version. This was very much based more on let's say a city type of clothing, not so much the country type of clothing, and that was on purpose, of course. She didn't go 1,000 years back in time to Viking times to be inspired, but she used the way one dressed back in the 1800s and was very much inspired by the materials that were produced at the local textile factories here in Oslo. She also has incorporated a lot of elements that point to Oslo as a city. She has also developed the 100-year dress for Norway, because in 2005, Norway as a nation celebrated 100 years. And this is the dress both for women and children, but also for men. And here she's more inspired, of course, by the bunad and the type of dress that is more from the countryside, not so much from the city. But we also see that she has been working very much with what one could call sort of more fantasy costumes. And here she can go a little bit more crazy with materials, with colors, using elements from our national costumes and different regional costumes, but done in the way that the user wants it, so that she works in very close cooperation with the customer. And here you see influencers who are very active in Norway, who have their fantasy dress from Eva-Li that they have been co-creating with her. And here you see some more of them. They're very colorful, very creative, very individual, and this is part of the whole package when she works with these influencers. They use them all the time. They wear them on May 17th, on national holiday, but also on the red carpet if they're attending a gala, opening, etc. So they do get a lot of uses. And this was one of the things that I've ended up discussing a lot with Livia Firth, who's founder of EcoAge. And she's very impressed by this sort of Norwegian special way of wearing clothes over and over and over again. And I think that it was part of inspiring her hashtag 30 wears. Of course, a bunad or national costume gets worn a lot more than 30 wears. Hopefully 60, 100, 200, 500 wears would be more realistic. And this is the most sustainable way of having clothes, is wearing them a lot. So that was the story of Eva-Li and how she has developed national costume in a new and innovative way. And it's all about understanding who makes your clothes, where they come from, There's a children's book in Norway and Sweden, which is about Pelle or Per, who wants a new suit, and how he starts with the sheep and sharing the wool, and then he makes sure that everyone who helps him on the way to weave the material, to spin it, to cut and to sew gets paid for what it actually costs. And that, of course, is also important when it comes to the bunad and the folk costume, is they cost a lot of money, but that's because it's an investment. But that also creates a connection and a love for the apparel and the clothing, so that one takes very, very good care of the clothes. So meeting the maker and knowing who is behind making those clothes is very, very important. Thank you.
One of Norway's cultural icons is the bunad, costumes that first flourished during the 19th century national romanticism movement, when Norwegians, in search of a national identity after centuries of Danish rule, thoroughly embraced all things uniquely Norwegian. Art, literature, and the distinctive character of folk attire worn by rural people. Today there are over 200 regional bunads.
There are different bunads for each part of the country. Even each region has their own bunad.
There is an unwritten law that either you have to come from the place where the bunad come from, or your parents, or at least your grandparents have some sort of relationship with the area.
Bunads vary greatly from place to place. One factor is the use of local materials. But another major influence came from beyond Norway.
Back a couple of hundred years, we had the traveling merchants coming to the remote valleys here in Norway, from France, from Belgium, from Germany. One guy went up one valley with his suitcase, another guy up another valley with his suitcase. So we can actually link the various types of bunads here in Norway today to various places down in Europe.
While bunads are made for both men and women, the female bunad is more ornate. The intricate designs are specific to the region where the bunad is created, with each detail telling its own story. So the bunad speaks volumes if you know how to read it.
Each type of silver belongs to a specific type of bunad. And when you have a closer look, you can see on the bunad whether the lady is a married person or not yet married.
That task was much easier in centuries past, when the hat or scout made the woman's status clear. The bunad grew into a Norwegian cultural icon thanks to 3 key women. Hulda Garborg, along with Clara Sem, praised the bunad as they strove to preserve local cultures. But it was the third woman, Norway's Queen Maud, who changed everything in 1906. When she received a Hardanger bunad from the women of Odda and began wearing it to official international events. The rest, as they say, is history. Her bunad became known as the Nasjonalen, and Norwegians soon began wearing their bunads to all types of special events. In recent decades, the bunad has grown even more popular, and it's now seen regularly at important occasions. Viking godmother Trude Drevland wore her Bergen-bunad when she named the Viking star. And ever since, the bunad has become a bit of a favorite among our godmothers. I also proudly wore mine as godmother of the beautiful Viking Sea. For most events, the bunad is a choice. But there's one day it's a must. On May 17th, Norway's Constitution Day, the bunad is a symbol of patriotism.
You are celebrating your country's freedom. There is the bunad, there is the shirt ironed, there is all the silver laying there, and I feel proud, so proud.
Norwegians treasure their freedom, and the 17th of May is an annual outpouring of joy and appreciation unlike anywhere else. A celebration with the iconic bunad at its heart.
The highlight of wearing a bunad, that is our national day, the 17th of May. You will see thousands and thousands of bunads. We wear it with great pride, proud of our country and the values we have here in Norway.
Norway is a land rich in culture and traditions. I hope you'll go out and explore her many treasures.